Do you ever think about those things from the 1970s, so normal back then, that are completely illegal now? These were the everyday items, traditions, and habits that shaped family life without anyone questioning their safety. So what changed so drastically that the familiar world we trusted became forbidden? Jell-O molds were not just recipes, they were performances. In the 1950s and 1960s, these shimmering towers of gelatin were the pride of dinner tables and potlucks alike. Suspended inside were slices of fruit, vegetables, nuts, and sometimes even meats, frozen in mid-dance by the wobble of lemon or lime gelatin. The molds themselves were often metal, shaped like flowers, domes, or decorative rings. Housewives practiced their releases with reverence, praying the mold would slide out cleanly with a satisfying thwack. The result? A glossy, surreal centerpiece. Guests gasped, children poked. Recipes were passed from neighbor to neighbor, each claiming their version was best. But these creations were not just about looks. Jell-O was cheap, shelf-stable, and forgiving. It let families stretch their ingredients during lean times. It made leftovers glamorous, and it brought a little joy to a time when people needed something bright and strange and wonderful. Eventually, tastes changed. Molds disappeared into cabinets. Jell-O became a snack cup. But for decades, it was art, it was pride, and it was love in a ring-shaped dish. When did we stop celebrating the food that made us smile before it ever touched our lips? Caper was one of those blink-and-you-miss-it specials that aired in only a few regions and at odd hours, usually sandwiched between local commercials and late-afternoon reruns. It featured Yogi at his most optimistic, wandering through a snow-covered Jellystone park with Boo Boo at his side, both of them determined to help Santa with a sudden holiday emergency. The animation had that classic Hanna-Barbera bounce, where characters slid across the screen instead of walking, and mouths flapped enthusiastically without always matching the words. Kids loved it anyway. Yogi tried to deliver presents, borrowed a sleigh that definitely did not belong to him, and got chased by a series of increasingly frustrated park rangers. Boo Boo, ever patient, offered gentle advice that Yogi ignored every single time. Families watched it once or twice before it vanished. Because it was a regional broadcast, no major studio stored the master reel, and reruns depended on whichever local station happened to have a usable copy. By the 1990s, most of those copies were gone. People still argue about the exact plot, but everyone agrees on one thing. Yogi dressed in winter gear stumbling through the snow is a memory too delightful to lose completely. When Gimme a Break, The Space Explorers was a bold attempt to mix two things children adored in the 1970s. Holiday cheer and outer space adventures, promising galaxies full of wonder and distant worlds. Santa teamed up with young astronauts who traveled through glittery starfields on a mission to deliver gifts to planets waiting for a visit from the North Pole. The animation sparkled with cosmic swirls, twinkling nebulas, and futuristic sleigh upgrades designed by someone who had never seen actual spacecraft but had definitely dreamed about them. Kids loved how Santa floated in zero gravity with his beard drifting like a slow comet behind him. The astronauts wore shiny suits decorated with candy cane stripes, and their rocket left trails of stardust wherever it flew. Every planet they visited had its own culture and its own way of celebrating the season with unique traditions. But when networks phased out space-themed holiday content in favor of traditional fare, the special vanished from schedules. No reruns, no re-releases, just the faint memory of Santa riding through the cosmos with explorers who believed Christmas could reach the stars. So, treated playground equipment stood in schoolyards and parks throughout the 1970s, its dark, oily surface baking under summer sun, while children climbed, swung, and played for hours at a time. The treatment made the wood virtually indestructible, resistant to rot, insects, and weather in ways that untreated lumber could never match. Schools and municipalities loved the durability because it meant fewer repairs and longer lifespans for expensive equipment. But creosote is a coal tar derivative, and its fumes and residue carry compounds that damage skin, lungs, and internal organs over time. Children pressed bare hands and legs against treated surfaces, absorbing chemicals through their skin without anyone realizing the exposure was happening. On hot days, the creosote softened and became sticky, clinging to clothing and flesh alike. When health officials connected these playgrounds to increased cancer risks, the equipment was torn down and replaced with safer materials. The sturdy structures that once seemed like smart investments became symbols of how cost savings can mask hidden costs that children ultimately pay. Non-plated ice trays looked sleek, shiny, and perfectly modern in the 1970s kitchen, especially beside the newest refrigerators. Metal trays froze water quickly, popped out cubes cleanly, and felt sturdier than plastic. But the smooth silver finish that made them look so refined came from cadmium, a heavy metal that slowly flaked off and mixed into the ice. People placed these contaminated cubes into children's drinks, iced tea pitchers, holiday punch bowls, and never suspected a thing. Over time, researchers discovered that cadmium could damage kidneys, weaken bones, and build up in the body with long-term exposure. The more scientists learned, the worse the picture became, and soon every health agency demanded that cadmium vanish from anything that touched food. When these trays were banned, most families were shocked to hear that something so normal had been quietly poisoning them. It still feels surreal that ordinary ice cubes, the kind you never think twice about, once carried risks nobody imagined. Electric can openers without benzene-based cabinet cleaners were the heavy-duty heroes of 1970s kitchen maintenance, promising to cut through grease, grime, and years of accumulated cooking residue with a single wipe. Homemakers sprayed them liberally inside cabinets, across countertops, and along stove hoods, filling kitchens with chemical fumes they assumed meant the product was working. The smell was sharp, almost sweet, the kind that made your eyes water slightly if you leaned in too close during scrubbing. Nobody questioned what they were breathing because the results were undeniable and the products were sold everywhere respectable cleaning supplies were stocked. But benzene does not simply evaporate and disappear. It enters the bloodstream through inhalation, accumulating in bone marrow and disrupting the body in ways that only became clear decades later. Families who prided themselves on spotless kitchens were unknowingly filling their homes with a carcinogen now banned from consumer products. The shift happened gradually as safer alternatives emerged, but for years those powerful cleaners had been doing invisible damage with every spray and wipe. The Great Santa Claus Caper brought the beloved rag dolls into a Christmas adventure filled with villains, rescues, and the kind of gentle chaos that made Saturday morning cartoons so appealing to young audiences. The animation had a handmade quality that matched the characters perfectly, making everything feel stitched together with love and thread rather than cold corporate calculation. Kids cheered as Anne and Andy outsmarted the bad guys and saved Christmas through courage, cleverness, and the power of friendship that never faltered. Parents appreciated how the special taught values without lecturing, wrapping lessons in entertainment that children actually wanted to watch again and again. But the Raggedy Ann franchise changed hands multiple times over the decades, with each transfer creating new complications in the rights to various productions. The Christmas special fell through the cracks during one of these transitions, its ownership unclear, and its distribution rights tangled beyond easy resolution. No company wanted to invest the legal resources needed to untangle the mess, so the special simply stopped appearing anywhere legitimate. The Christmas Raccoons in Christmas Snowstorm arrived on television screens with that laid-back Southern humor the character was known for, wrapped gently in a blanket of winter mischief and holiday warmth. The animation was simple, the jokes were cozy, and the characters moved with the slow, gentle pacing of a holiday morning when nobody was in any rush to do anything at all. The plot usually involved a snowstorm blowing through the swamp, sending Deputy Dog scrambling to keep holiday decorations from drifting away while preventing his friends from creating even bigger messes. Kids loved the gentle humor, the warm, drawling voices, and the way the snowfall looked like tiny cotton flakes drifting lazily across the painted backgrounds. There was something deeply comforting about watching a cartoon that never raised its voice or rushed toward any particular destination. But as decades passed, broadcasting rights grew tangled in complicated webs nobody could untangle. Some of the humor was deemed too outdated to air again. Reruns vanished, home releases never materialized, and the special slipped quietly into obscurity where only those who caught it during a lucky afternoon rerun still remember its gentle charm. Rooms, offices, and craft rooms throughout the 1970s, its sharp chemical smell drifting through school hallways wherever projects were being assembled. Students brushed it onto posters, teachers used it for bulletin boards, and artists relied on it for everything from collages to professional mounting work. The adhesive spread smoothly, dried quickly, and created bonds strong enough to last for years. Nobody questioned the fumes because they seemed like a normal part of the creative process. But benzene does not simply evaporate harmlessly into the air. It enters the bloodstream through inhalation, accumulating in bone marrow and disrupting the production of healthy blood cells. Researchers eventually linked prolonged benzene exposure to leukemia and other serious blood disorders, findings that sent shockwaves through industries that had relied on the chemical for decades. When regulations banned benzene from consumer adhesives, schools scrambled to replace supplies they had trusted for years. Today, safer alternatives fill the same roles, but the memory of that sharp chemical scent still lingers. Saccharin without warning label limits were once tossed casually into every junk drawer in the 1970s. They powered lamps, radios, holiday lights, and entire living room setups without anyone considering what might happen under the strain. Most families used the same cord for years, letting it twist, fray, bend, and tangle behind couches where nobody ever checked it. But these early cords had no grounding protection, no heat cutoff, and often no insulation strong enough to withstand long-term use. As electricity flowed through overloaded wires, the heat built up silently, melting plastic, exposing metal, and creating sparks just waiting for something flammable to touch. House fires that seemed random at first began revealing the same culprit hiding in the ashes. Firefighters kept finding extension cords scorched to nothing. Their ends fused to outlets, investigators pushed for stricter standards, and eventually the unregulated cords were banned in favor of grounded, temperature-tested designs. Families were shocked to learn that the thin cord they trusted to bring power into their homes had been one of the biggest fire hazards they owned. It is unsettling to think that a simple everyday tool, used so casually, held the potential to destroy an entire home without any warning at all. Lead-glazed ceramic crockpots were the crown jewels of 1970s kitchens, sitting proudly on countertops with their earthy brown tones and hand-painted floral patterns that made every slow-cooked meal feel like a labor of love. Families trusted these heavy stoneware pots completely, filling them with stews and roasts that simmered for hours, while the house filled with comforting aromas. The glazes that made these pots so beautiful were often mixed with lead compounds that gave them their rich, glossy finish, and nobody questioned what might be seeping into the food during those long cooking sessions. Mothers stirred soups, tasted broths straight from the pot, and served meals to children who had no idea that the glaze making everything look so appetizing was slowly contaminating every bite. It took years before researchers connected decorative cookware to elevated lead levels in families who used them regularly. When the bans finally arrived, people were stunned to learn that something so wholesome had been quietly poisoning dinners for years. Those beautiful pots now sit in antique shops as reminders of a time when nobody thought twice about what their cookware might be hiding. The story of the first Christmas snow wore its religious heart on its sleeve, telling the nativity story through animation designed to inspire faith in young viewers across America. Churches loved it, religious schools screened it during December assemblies, and families who wanted their children to understand the spiritual meaning of the holiday embraced it without reservation or hesitation. The special made no apologies for its message, presenting the birth of Christ as the central event of the season and expecting audiences to receive it with reverence and quiet reflection. For years, it aired alongside secular specials, offering families a choice that reflected their own beliefs about Christmas. But as public schools moved toward stricter separation of church and state, screenings in educational settings became impossible to justify legally. Networks, wary of alienating secular viewers, gradually reduced its airtime until it vanished entirely from broadcast schedules. The special that once represented Christmas for millions became inaccessible, restricted to private collections and church libraries. Cricket on the Hearth adapted a Charles The Christmas Trolls of Timber Hollow was a woodland fantasy special that looked like it had been animated with crayons, moss, and the softest winter sunlight filtering through hand-painted trees. The trolls were more whimsical than frightening, with big noses, fluffy hair, and oversized mittens that made everything they touched seem gentler and warmer. There was a sequence involving glowing berry lanterns that felt so enchanting people still describe it decades later. The trolls danced in circles around a fire that shimmered like painted light, their shadows stretching and curling like characters of their own. The story followed their efforts to protect Timber Hollow from an unexpected winter disaster while preparing for their once-a-year holiday feast. Kids loved watching the trolls tumble through snow, gather glowing berries, and sing harmonies that sounded like lullabies mixed with wind chimes. But as animation standards evolved, the troll designs were labeled outdated, and concerns grew about how certain features might be interpreted by modern viewers. The special was quietly shelved, never remastered, and rarely mentioned again by anyone with authority to bring it back. The great kitchen cabinets, bedroom furniture, and shelving units throughout the 1970s, releasing invisible fumes that families breathed without ever knowing the source. The material was cheap, versatile, and easy to manufacture, making it the go-to choice for builders who needed affordable options for growing suburban markets. New homes smelled strongly of something chemical, but people assumed the odor would fade with time. What they did not realize was that formaldehyde gas continued seeping from pressed wood products for months or even years after installation. The fumes irritated eyes, triggered headaches, and aggravated respiratory conditions in ways that doctors struggled to explain. Children sleeping in bedrooms filled with particle board furniture breathed in the chemical night after night. When researchers connected the dots between indoor air quality and these building materials, regulators stepped in with emission standards that forced manufacturers to reformulate. The cheap construction solution that had filled millions of homes became a symbol of how convenience can carry invisible costs that only surface when the damage is already done. Hexavalent carpet glues with benzene additives were a quiet danger during the home renovation boom of the 1970s. People ripped up old flooring, laid down plush carpets, and sealed everything with adhesives that promised long-lasting hold. The smell was strong, but homeowners shrugged it off as the normal scent of fresh renovation, never imagining the fumes were far more dangerous than they appeared. Benzene, a chemical once used freely in these glues, can enter the body through inhalation and accumulate over time. Families who spent long hours installing carpet in closed rooms breathed in concentrated fumes without any ventilation. Children and pets crawling across newly glued floors ended up inhaling vapors that lingered long after the glue dried. Studies eventually linked benzene exposure to leukemia and other blood disorders, and regulators sounded the alarm. The ban arrived quickly after scientists traced these illnesses back to widespread residential exposure. For many families, the realization was heartbreaking. Something that symbolized a fresh start, a home improvement meant to bring warmth and comfort, had instead filled their houses with one of the most harmful chemicals ever allowed inside. It still feels shocking that such a powerful toxin was packaged and sold as casually as any household supply. Teflon-coated pans with PFOA felt like pure kitchen magic when they first appeared in 1970s homes, promising that eggs would slide effortlessly and cleanup would take seconds instead of endless scrubbing. Families marveled at how nothing stuck to these miracle surfaces, tossing away their old cast iron in favor of something that seemed too good to be true. And in many ways, it was. The chemical compound that made these pans so slick released toxic fumes when the coating overheated, which happened more easily than most cooks realized. Birds in kitchens died suddenly from the invisible gases, and people reported flu-like symptoms after cooking sessions that pushed these pans past their limits. Nobody thought to question why a cooking surface could kill a parakeet nearby, because the convenience was simply too appealing to resist. It took decades before researchers understood how these forever chemicals accumulated in the body and refused to break down. When regulators finally stepped in, the original formulations were banned. but the memory of those early pans lingers uncomfortably for anyone who spent years breathing in fumes they never knew existed. Cadme the year. Without a Santa Claus in its original broadcast cut was the kind of holiday event that stopped everything in the house the moment it flickered onto the screen. Families planned their evenings around it, adjusting dinner times and gathering on couches with blankets pulled tight against the December chill while the tree glowed softly in the corner. The Miser Brothers were instantly iconic, their musical numbers so catchy that kids sang them for weeks afterward, turning schoolyards into stages for off-key performances that drove teachers absolutely mad. Parents loved it too, finding humor in the sibling rivalry and the gentle absurdity of a world where weather was controlled by bickering magical beings dressed in flames and frost. But behind the scenes, the music rights grew tangled as original agreements expired and estates demanded costly renegotiation. Licensing disputes turned what seemed like a permanent fixture into a legal puzzle no broadcaster wanted to solve. When networks quietly stopped airing it, families noticed but never fully understood why. Today, the original cut remains locked away, a casualty of contracts that outlived the people who signed them. Berenstain Bears' first holiday animation had all the charm of a bedtime story translated into motion with crayons, patience, and perhaps a few cups of cocoa fueling the animators through long winter nights. The lines were thick, the colors slightly muted, and the characters moved with that slow, deliberate pace that made it feel like someone was turning the pages of a storybook right there on your television screen. Mama Bear offered gentle advice in a voice that echoed through the mono speakers with warmth that wrapped around the whole living room. Papa Bear stumbled through decorating with his signature enthusiastic clumsiness, managing to tangle himself in lights and knock over trees in ways that made children giggle and parents nod knowingly. Brother and Sister Bear scampered about in scarves that never stayed in place, discovering the meaning of the season through adventures both simple and sweet. The animation stuttered occasionally, and the snow looked more like confetti drifting lazily downward. But none of that mattered to children who already loved the bears from countless bedtime readings. Newer versions arrived with sharper lines and brighter colors, pushing this original quietly into forgotten archives. The Christmas that all backyard entertainment in the 1970s, heavy enough to arc through the summer sky and sharp enough to stick firmly into grass with a satisfying thud. Families gathered outside after cookouts, tossing these weighted missiles toward plastic rings, while children ran barefoot through the yard, chasing fireflies and waiting for their turn. The game felt thrilling because the darts had real weight, real force, and real consequences if someone misjudged a throw. Parents saw it as harmless outdoor fun, the kind of activity that got kids away from the television and into the fresh air where they belonged. But the injuries began mounting, and they were not minor scrapes or bruises. Emergency rooms reported puncture wounds, skull fractures, and tragedies that turned sunny afternoons into nightmares. Children were struck while playing nearby, unaware that a dart was spiraling toward them from across the yard. When regulators finally stepped in, the ban came with undeniable urgency. These toys became symbols of a decade that underestimated how quickly fun could turn fatal when sharp metal met soft skin. Polyurethane cushions without fire barriers were the soft, bouncy heart of nearly every couch and living room chair in the 1970s, and nobody thought twice about sitting on them for hours. The furniture looked cozy, inviting, and perfectly harmless, but inside the cushions was a ticking time bomb. The foam was unbelievably flammable and burned hotter and faster than most people could even imagine. All it took was a dropped cigarette, a spark from a fireplace, or a child playing too close to a lamp for the entire cushion to erupt in flames. Families often had no warning at all, because the foam did not smolder slowly the way natural fibers did. Instead, it ignited instantly and produced thick black smoke that filled a room before anyone had time to react. Firefighters began reporting the same horrifying pattern in house after house, and investigators realized that these cushions were turning small accidents into full-blown tragedies. Government stepped in and demanded fire-resistant barriers, but only after far too many avoidable disasters. Looking back, It is unsettling to know that a perfectly ordinary piece of furniture could transform into something so dangerous without a single person in the home realizing it. Recalled, formaldehyde-sealed wooden cutting boards were standard equipment in 1970s kitchens, their smooth hardwood surfaces treated with chemicals that promised to prevent warping, cracking, and bacterial growth for years. Families chopped vegetables, sliced bread, and prepared raw meat on these boards daily, trusting that the industrial treatment made them superior to untreated alternatives. What homemakers did not realize was that formaldehyde, a known carcinogen, slowly released from these treated surfaces over time, especially when the wood was scored by repeated knife cuts. Every slice through an onion, every chop through a carrot released tiny amounts of the chemical directly into the food being prepared. The smell was faint, sometimes undetectable, and easily dismissed as the natural scent of wood. Researchers eventually documented how formaldehyde exposure in kitchens contributed to respiratory irritation and long-term health concerns. When regulations tightened and safer sealants became available, the older boards were phased out. But for decades, families had been seasoning their meals with something far more dangerous than salt and pepper. Boy Book 2 continued a story that many families considered sacred, following the boy and his drum into new adventures that tested his faith and his courage. The animation carried the same reverent tone as the original, treating its religious themes with sincerity rather than irony, and children responded to the quiet power of the narrative. Parents appreciated how the sequel expanded the world without abandoning the spirit that made the first special so beloved. Churches screened it during Advent services, and families slotted it into their December viewing schedules alongside the original as a matched pair. But music rights proved to be the undoing of this gentle sequel. The songs that made the special memorable required licenses that expired and were never renewed, and the cost of renegotiating those rights exceeded what any broadcaster was willing to pay. Networks simply stopped airing it, and home video releases dried up as distributors let contracts lapse. The Little Drummer Boy Book 2 faded into obscurity, a continuation that most people forgot existed until someone mentioned it and the memories came flooding back. The original Strawberry Shortcake Winter Special arrived before the character became the polished pastel icon of the 1980s, back when her bonnet was slightly oversized and her cheeks were painted a shade too rosy for realism. The animation had a grainy quality that made every scene look like a frosted cookie left too long on a winter windowsill, soft around the edges and slightly crystallized by time. Strawberry herself spoke in a voice that sounded like it was recorded inside an actual mixing bowl, echoing sweetly through speakers that added warmth to every word. Her friends drifted through scenes with stiff movements that betrayed limited budgets and ambitious hearts. The plot usually involved saving someone from a winter mishap or bringing warmth to a corner of Strawberry Land that had grown too cold. Children watched with wide eyes as the world of berries and baking came alive in ways picture books never quite managed. But licensing shifted to new corporate homes shortly after, tangling the original in agreements that prevented any re-release. The special became a ghost, never acknowledged, never remastered, existing only in the certainty of those who remember. Yogi trichloroethylene degreasers filled garage shelves and workshop cabinets throughout the 1970s, trusted by mechanics, hobbyists, and homeowners who needed powerful solvents to cut through grease and grime. The liquid worked beautifully on engines, tools, and machinery, dissolving oil and residue with an efficiency that made it seem indispensable. People poured it into buckets, soaked parts overnight, and breathed in fumes without ventilation or protective gear. The chemical smell was sharp and unmistakable, but strength was considered a virtue in cleaning products. What nobody realized was that trichloroethylene seeped into groundwater, contaminated soil, and accumulated in human tissues with every exposure. Communities built near factories that used the chemical discovered their water supplies were poisoned, and workers who handled it daily developed cancers that took years to connect to their jobs. When regulators finally acted, they banned trichloroethylene for most consumer applications and ordered massive environmental cleanups. The degreaser that seemed essential to every garage became evidence of how industrial chemicals spread invisibly through the world we thought we controlled. After the final bell in the 1970s, students did not always go home. Many schools expected them to stay behind to clean the classrooms, sweeping floors, wiping chalkboards, emptying trash bins, and straightening desks. It was not considered community service. It was simply part of being a student. Children's metal high chairs without restraints were a familiar sight in homes across the 1970s, their shiny metal frames and simple trays making them look sturdy and dependable. Parents placed their toddlers inside with complete trust, believing the chair's weight alone would keep it stable. But these early designs tipped over easily, especially when a child leaned forward, pushed against the tray, or shifted their weight. Without proper straps, nothing stopped a child from sliding out, standing up, or toppling the entire chair. Emergency rooms saw a disturbing rise in head injuries, broken arms, and frightening falls from these seemingly harmless seats. Investigators found the same design flaws again and again, leading to urgent safety campaigns and eventual bans. Looking back, it is painful to imagine how many parents never realized the danger until it was too late. A piece of furniture meant to protect a child ended up putting them at risk, proving that safety can never be something you assume. Aluminum pressure cookers without safety valves were the time-saving heroes of busy 1970s households, promising to turn tough cuts of meat into tender masterpieces in a fraction of the usual time. Families gathered around these hissing, steaming pots with a mixture of excitement and anticipation, watching the pressure gauge climb while dinner transformed inside. The problem was that early models had no reliable way to release excess pressure when things went wrong. One moment you had a pot roast cooking peacefully, and the next moment the lid could launch toward the ceiling with enough force to dent plaster or worse. Kitchens across America experienced explosions that sent scalding food and metal fragments flying in every direction, leaving burns and injuries in their wake. Parents who had proudly shown off their modern cooking technology suddenly found themselves explaining to emergency room doctors how dinner ended up embedded in the walls. When safety standards finally caught up, regulators demanded multiple release mechanisms that made the older models illegal to sell. Those unregulated cookers became cautionary tales about speed and convenience coming at the cost of basic protection. The Stingiest Man in Town from 1978 brought Charles Dickens into living rooms through animation that felt handcrafted and deeply personal in ways modern productions rarely achieve. This version of A Christmas Carol leaned into musical numbers, filling Scrooge's journey with songs that lingered long after the credits rolled and the screen went dark. Kids who had never read Dickens absorbed the story through melody and color, humming tunes about misery and redemption without fully understanding the weight of the words they sang. Parents appreciated how the special handled darkness and hope in equal measure, never shying away from the ghostly warnings. It became a quiet favorite, never as famous as other adaptations, but fiercely loved by those who discovered it. Then the studio that owned it collapsed, swallowed by mergers. The Partridge Family Christmas cartoon episode was the kind of 1970s holiday special that felt like someone took the spirit of the live-action show, added twice as many sparkles, and animated the whole thing with the brightest crayons the studio could find. The Partridge Kids, complete with perfectly feathered hair even in cartoon form, piled into their Technicolor tour bus for a holiday adventure that made very little sense and yet somehow felt exactly right. Every scene swayed to upbeat music that sounded like Christmas carols, sped up just enough to keep the energy crackling. Laurie tried to keep everyone organized while Danny took charge of situations he definitely should not have been leading. Little Tracy occasionally wandered off to talk to friendly animals that appeared without any explanation at all. The animation leaned into bold colors and expressive poses that made even simple moments feel dramatic. But the animated spin-off never found a stable home in syndication, and the Christmas episode suffered most from the shuffle. Licensing bounced between companies, reruns dwindled to nothing, and eventually the holiday special vanished entirely into the fog of forgotten television history. Deputy Dog's mornings in the 1970s, promising fast drying times and salon-quality results right in your own bathroom. Women held these devices inches from their faces, aiming warm air at damp hair while breathing in whatever drifted through the vents. The dryers hummed reliably, lasted for years, and felt like a small piece of progress in an era obsessed with convenience. Manufacturers used asbestos in the heating elements because the material resisted heat beautifully, never melting no matter how long the dryer ran. But that same heat loosened microscopic fibers that floated invisibly into the air with every use. Families had no idea that something designed to make mornings easier was quietly releasing particles capable of lodging permanently in lung tissue. Researchers later connected asbestos exposure to devastating respiratory diseases, including cancers that appeared decades after initial contact. When the truth emerged, the shock was immediate, because these were everyday tools sitting in bathroom drawers, used by mothers and grandmothers who trusted the brand names on the handles. Ceramic holiday decorations once lined mantels and shelves throughout the winter season, adding color and sparkle to family homes. People displayed painted figurines, candle holders, and ceramic ornaments passed down through generations. What they did not know was that the glossy paint and glaze often contained dangerously high levels of lead. As these decorations aged, tiny flakes and dust particles settled onto furniture, carpets, and even children's hands. Toddlers who played near decorated mantels or chewed on ceramic ornaments were unknowingly exposed to lead, a heavy metal that can cause lifelong developmental damage. Parents never imagined that something so festive could carry such a hidden danger. Once researchers tested older ceramics and found extreme lead levels, governments banned many of the glazes and paints used at the time. Families were urged to pack away heirlooms or handle them with caution. It is still troubling to think that the cheerful decorations meant to brighten homes in winter were quietly releasing toxic particles into the same rooms where children played. Liquid bronze lead-soldered copper cookware held a special place in 1970s kitchens, its gleaming reddish surfaces suggesting professional quality and timeless elegance that lesser pots could never match. Home cooks displayed these pieces proudly, believing they had invested in something that would last generations and make every dish taste better. The craftsmanship was undeniable, but hidden in the seams where copper panels joined together was lead solder that made the connection strong and seamless. Every time acidic ingredients like wine, vinegar, or tomatoes simmered in these beautiful pots, lead leached silently into the food. Families served marinara sauce and countless other dishes contaminated with a heavy metal that accumulated in bones and blood over time. Children absorbed the toxin even faster than adults, their growing bodies storing poison with every meal their parents prepared with such care. When researchers finally connected copper cookware to elevated lead levels in households, the bans followed quickly. Those elegant pots, once symbols of culinary sophistication, became warnings about how beauty and craftsmanship can sometimes mask dangers simmering beneath the surface. The bear who slept through Christmas followed a curious bear who refused to hibernate because he desperately wanted to experience the holiday everyone talked about, but he had never seen with his own sleepy eyes. Children connected instantly with his determination and his wonder, watching him discover Christmas lights, presents, and carols for the very first time while fighting the urge to curl up and sleep through it all. The animation was cozy and warm, perfectly matching the gentle tone of a story that never raised its voice or rushed toward unnecessary conflict or drama. Families loved how peaceful it felt compared to more frantic holiday specials, treating it as the perfect wind-down viewing before bedtime on cold December nights when sleep came easily. But the small studio that produced it closed its doors in the early 80s, and no larger company stepped in to acquire the rights or maintain distribution of its catalog. The Bear Who Slept Through Christmas simply drifted away, unavailable through any official channel and surviving only in the fading memories of viewers who caught it during its brief original run. Christmas with the Groovy Ghoulies was unlike any holiday cartoon before or since, a delightful collision of spooky fun and festive cheer that somehow made perfect sense to children of the 1970s. Imagine a group of cheerful monsters celebrating Christmas as if they were hosting a rock concert inside a haunted house, decorated with twinkling lights and plastic snow drifting from the rafters. The Ghoulies sang, danced, cracked jokes, and somehow made the spooky season work perfectly alongside the festive one without ever feeling like a contradiction. Kids adored the bright colors and silly humor, while adults found themselves humming the surprisingly catchy songs long after the credits rolled. The whole production bounced with an energy that felt both chaotic and perfectly controlled at the same time. But the special relied heavily on music owned by multiple companies, and when those rights expired, the whole production was yanked from circulation without warning. Attempts to reissue it ran into legal snarls that turned the special into television folklore. Today, it survives mostly as a nostalgic whisper among fans who remember the joy of watching monsters celebrate Christmas like the friendliest house band. The Gumby Christmas clay balls were the must-have toy of the early 1970s, swinging wildly from strings as children competed to see who could keep them clicking the longest. The heavy balls smashed together with a satisfying crack that echoed through playgrounds and living rooms, creating a rhythm that kids found hypnotic and adults found maddening. Parents bought them by the millions, never imagining that the acrylic could shatter under repeated impact. But the balls were not designed to withstand the force children applied, and when they broke violently. Shards flew in every direction, striking faces, cutting hands, and lodging in eyes before anyone could react. Emergency rooms reported a surge of injuries that traced back to this single toy, and the pattern was impossible to ignore. Regulators pulled clackers from shelves and banned the original design, replacing it with softer materials that could not cause the same damage. The toy that had defined playground culture for a brief, intense moment became a cautionary tale about the gap between what seems fun and what proves safe. Children who grew up swinging those acrylic balls still remember the sound and the danger that came with it. Children's irons with cloth-wrapped cords were a normal sight in 70s households, lying beside ironing boards or tucked into laundry room shelves without anyone questioning their safety. The cords looked harmless, almost gentle compared to the heavier rubber-coated wires that came later, but cloth insulation frayed easily, soaking up humidity, heat, and dust until the fibers loosened and exposed the wires underneath. A single spark from a damaged cord could ignite the fabric instantly, turning a simple ironing session into a dangerous situation. Many families experienced small scares without realizing they were warnings of a much larger hazard hiding in plain sight. As fires and electrical shocks became more common, inspectors pushed hard for safer rubber-insulated cords that could withstand heat and wear. When the ban finally arrived, it was clear that these older cords had been accidents waiting to happen. Today, it is startling to think how casually people handled something that could burst into flames with barely a nudge or twist. Popcorn ceiling repair. Asbestos trivets and potholders were considered the ultimate in kitchen safety during the 1970s, promising to protect countertops and hands from even the hottest pans fresh off the stove. Families stacked them in drawers, hung them beside ovens, and used them daily without giving a single thought to what made these items so remarkably heat-resistant. The answer was asbestos, a mineral fiber that could withstand extreme temperatures but also released microscopic particles into the air with every use. Each time someone grabbed a potholder to lift a casserole or slid a trivet under a sizzling skillet, invisible fibers drifted through the kitchen into the lungs of everyone nearby. Children did homework at kitchen tables while parents cooked dinner inches away from materials now known to cause devastating respiratory diseases. The tragedy is that asbestos felt so safe, so perfectly suited for its purpose that questioning it seemed absurd. When the truth emerged and bans swept through households, people were horrified to realize they had been protecting their hands while slowly harming their lungs. Those trivets became symbols of how easily danger can disguise itself as convenience. Or turned a beloved poem into a full animated adventure featuring a town of mice and a clockmaker racing against time to restore Santa's faith in their village. The Rankin Bass production brought warmth, humor, and surprisingly catchy musical numbers to a story that could have been simple, but instead became something families treasured year after year. Children learned the words to songs they did not fully understand, belting out lyrics about clocks and letters, while parents smiled at the earnest performances happening in their living rooms. The special became a staple of holiday programming, aired reliably every December, until suddenly it was not. Music licensing costs climbed steadily as the decades passed, and eventually networks decided the fees exceeded what the ratings could justify. Rather than pay the escalating royalties, broadcasters quietly dropped it from their schedules and replaced it with cheaper alternatives that owned their music outright. Today, tracking down a legitimate copy requires effort that most casual viewers will never invest, leaving the special stranded between beloved memory and accessible reality. The Littlest Elf's Snowy Journey was one of the softest, sweetest Christmas specials ever aired. The kind of program that felt like a lullaby translated into moving pictures and gentle winter dreams. The animation had that watercolor look that made every snowy hill seem hand-brushed, every detail glowing with winter softness that wrapped around viewers like a warm blanket. The story followed a tiny elf determined to deliver one lost present before sunrise, wandering through forests, across icy ponds, and beneath shimmering skies filled with stars that seemed to guide his path safely home. The narration was gentle, the music warm, and the pacing slow enough to feel like a bedtime story told by firelight. Children watched with drooping eyes as the little elf trudged through snowdrifts that sparkled like sugar scattered across velvet. But the special aired only once or twice in select regions, never released on tape, and the master copy was never preserved. As a result, no broadcast-quality version survives today. Fans describe scenes vividly, but no one can prove it existed except through childhood memories that glow softer with each passing year. The Christmas Bliss terrain vehicles were the ultimate weekend thrill in the 1970s, roaring across fields, trails, and backyards with a power that made every rider feel invincible. Families bought them for recreation, believing that the smaller size and simpler design made them safer than full-sized motorcycles or four-wheelers. Children as young as 10 climbed aboard, gripping handlebars and accelerating into terrain that demanded far more skill than most riders possessed. The problem was physics. Three wheels created an unstable platform that tipped easily during sharp turns, sudden stops, or uneven ground. Riders were thrown from machines that rolled over them, crushed beneath vehicles they thought they controlled. Emergency rooms filled with fractures, head injuries, and fatalities that all traced back to the same fundamental design flaw. When regulators finally intervened, they banned the sale of new three-wheelers and launched safety campaigns warning families about the dangers lurking in garages and barns across the country. The machines that once symbolized outdoor freedom became reminders of how quickly excitement can turn deadly when engineering fails to account for real-world conditions. Sniffable, disposable flash cubes were once the beating heart of 70s photography, clicking into place on top of the camera with a satisfying snap before lighting up the room with each shot. Families used them for birthdays, school events, and vacations, capturing precious memories with brilliant bursts of light. What people did not know was that each cube used a miniature combustion reaction to create that brightness. After several flashes, the internal chemicals heated up rapidly, and in some cases, the cube overheated to the point of bursting. Photographers discovered burns on their hands, shards of plastic flying into the air, and in rare situations, small flames flickering from overloaded cubes. Parents who handed cameras to their children had no idea the tiny box above the lens held such explosive potential. Once regulators investigated the pattern of injuries, the most dangerous cubes were banned and safer versions replaced them. Still, the idea of a family photo session turning unexpectedly hazardous remains one of the strangest relics of 70s technology. It is unsettling to think that capturing a simple picture could have ended with a trip to the emergency room. Nestor the long-eared Christmas donkey arrived in living rooms with a gentle sincerity that caught many families completely off guard during its original broadcast. The story followed a small donkey ridiculed for his oversized ears, wandering through a harsh winter landscape until destiny placed him beneath a star and beside a manger in Bethlehem. It was unmistakably religious, unapologetically sentimental, and surprisingly moving for a stop-motion special aimed at young children watching on a cold December night. Kids connected with Nestor's loneliness and eventual triumph, while parents found themselves wiping tears during scenes they had not expected to hit quite so hard. Churches recommended it, and families added it to their annual traditions without hesitation or question. But as broadcasting standards shifted, Nestor quietly slipped off schedules across the country. Religious content became a liability rather than a selling point, and the special's overtly faith-based message made programmers nervous. No major streaming service picked it up, and home video releases grew scarce as contracts lapsed without renewal. On Saturday morning arrived like an unexpected gift between cereal commercials and superhero adventures, catching children off guard with ballerinas instead of battles. The animation moved slowly, deliberately, with dancers holding poses a beat longer than physics should allow, creating a dreamlike quality that hypnotized anyone patient enough to watch. Backgrounds shimmered in pastel pinks and icy blues, painted with a softness that made the whole production feel like a living snow globe. The music echoed faintly, recorded in some distant studio where every note carried a slight reverb that added mystery to familiar melodies. Kids who expected action found themselves entranced by grace, and parents recognized melodies from their own childhoods. The Nutcracker Prince battled mice with a seriousness that made the stakes feel real despite the gentle pace. But networks eventually shifted toward higher energy content, and bigger budget adaptations stole whatever spotlight remained. Without reruns or home releases, this delicate version faded into obscurity, leaving behind only the sensation of having witnessed something beautiful that no one else quite remembers. The Baronet during the 1970s, their slender glass tubes and silver lines considered the most reliable way to check a fever. Parents shook them with practiced flicks of the wrist, placed them under children's tongues, and watched the mercury rise with a mix of worry and hope. The thermometers felt precise, scientific, and completely trustworthy, passed down through families like small instruments of care. Nobody thought twice about the silvery liquid inside, even when a thermometer cracked and tiny beads of mercury rolled across bathroom counters. Children chased the shimmering droplets, poking at them with curious fingers while parents swept the mess away without gloves or concern. What families did not understand was that mercury vapor could fill a room invisibly, entering lungs and accumulating in bodies with every breath. The metal never left once it entered, building up slowly and causing damage that sometimes took years to surface. When health officials recognized the danger, regulations pulled mercury thermometers from stores and urged families to dispose of old ones safely. Asbestos hair dryers were marketed as the sleek, modern solution for busy. Chemical toilet bowl cakes with banned disinfectants were once found in every bathroom, tucked under the rim of the toilet like a secret cleaning assistant. They promised powerful sanitizing results, bright colors, fresh smells, and a sparkling bowl with no effort at all. Ads showed families proudly popping them into place, believing they were protecting their homes from germs. What they were actually doing was filling small, poorly ventilated bathrooms with toxic fumes. The chemicals inside these cakes reacted with air and moisture, releasing vapors that irritated eyes, throats, and lungs. Some children fainted, adults developed headaches, and pets avoided the bathroom altogether. The danger was multiplied in tiny homes or apartments where fans were weak and windows rarely opened. Over time, researchers realized these disinfectants were far harsher than anyone knew and could cause long-term respiratory damage. Governments banned the most dangerous formulas once the truth came out, but by then, countless families had breathed in those fumes day after day without ever suspecting the cause of their discomfort. It is a chilling reminder of how something sold as cleanliness can become the very thing that pollutes your home. Colored enamelware brought a burst of sunshine into 1970s kitchens with its vibrant oranges, fiery reds, and cheerful yellows that made even the simplest cooking tasks feel festive. These bright pots and pans looked stunning hanging from pot racks or sitting on stovetops, their glossy surfaces catching the light and adding warmth to every meal. Families used them daily for boiling pasta, simmering sauces, and warming soups, never imagining that the pigments creating those beautiful colors contained cadmium, a heavy metal with serious health consequences. Every time acidic foods like tomatoes touched these surfaces, tiny amounts of cadmium leached into whatever was being cooked. Children ate from bowls filled with contaminated stews, while parents proudly showed off their colorful kitchen collections. Researchers eventually discovered that cadmium exposure could damage kidneys, weaken bones, and accumulate dangerously over time. The bans arrived swiftly once the evidence became clear, forcing families to discard cookware they had treasured for years. Those cheerful orange pots serve as reminders that the brightest things in our kitchens sometimes carried the darkest secrets. Santa Bear's First Christmas introduced a cuddly character designed to sell toys as much as tell stories, but somehow the special transcended its commercial origins and became something children genuinely loved. The animation was bright and cheerful, following Santa Bear as he discovered his purpose and learned what it meant to bring joy to others during the most magical season of the year. Kids adored the character and begged for the stuffed versions that appeared in stores alongside the broadcast. Parents appreciated that the special, despite its obvious merchandising intent, actually delivered a heartfelt story with genuine emotional moments. But when the toy line was eventually discontinued due to declining sales, the marketing agreements that kept the special on the air expired without renewal. No company saw value in promoting a character whose merchandise no longer filled shelves, so Santa Bear's First Christmas quietly vanished from broadcast schedules and home video catalogs alike. Today, it survives only in the memories of children who loved a bear that the business world decided was no longer worth remembering. The Wacky Races Christmas Rally took the show's chaotic energy and wrapped it tightly in tinsel, snowdrifts, and competitive holiday spirit that made every lap feel like a celebration. All the racers returned, each determined to win the North Pole Cup while navigating snowy roads, slippery ice patches, and the occasional mischievous elf causing mayhem along the frozen track. Dick Dastardly plotted elaborate holiday-themed traps, while Muttley giggled with delight every time a snowman exploded in just the wrong place. The animation bounced with frantic energy, cars skidding through winter wonderlands painted in bright blues and sparkling whites. Kids leaned forward without realizing it, caught up in the chaos of vehicles rocketing across landscapes that looked like Christmas cards come to life. Every crash felt harmless, every scheme felt playful, and every finish line felt earned. But the special featured characters owned by several different rights holders, and once the contracts expired, the whole holiday rally fell into legal limbo. Attempts to re-air it were blocked by overlapping claims that nobody could untangle. Today it exists only in fleeting memories and a few blurry promotional images. Joe's sprays were everywhere in the 1970s, hissing out of hairspray cans, deodorant bottles, and cleaning products in kitchens and bathrooms across the country. People loved the convenience of a simple press that delivered a fine mist, whether styling hair before work or freshening up a room before company arrived. The chemical propellants inside made everything feel modern and effortless, a small daily luxury that nobody questioned. Families used these sprays freely, filling enclosed bathrooms with clouds of mist that lingered long after the can was set down. What nobody realized was that each press released compounds capable of drifting upward through the atmosphere and destroying the ozone layer that protected the planet from harmful radiation. Scientists eventually traced a growing hole in the ozone directly to these everyday products sitting under bathroom sinks. The revelation was staggering, because something so ordinary had been quietly contributing to a global environmental crisis. Regulators banned chlorofluorocarbons from consumer products, but the damage to the atmosphere took decades to heal. Mercury thermometers were a fixture in every medicine cabinet. Plastic wraps containing PVC and DEHA were considered one of the ultimate conveniences in a 1970s kitchen. You pulled the crinkly sheet from the roll, stretched it across leftovers, pressed it tightly around bowls, and trusted it to keep food fresh the way every advertisement promised. It smelled like plastic, it clung to everything, and once it touched warm food, it softened and drooped in a way that felt completely normal at the time. What nobody realized was that heat made the chemicals inside the wrap migrate directly into the food beneath it. Studies later showed that PVC and DEHA leached into meats, cheeses, and even produce when the wrap was warmed, folded, or pressed tightly, especially in lunchboxes left sitting in the sun. Families consumed those chemicals daily without knowing it, believing they were protecting their food instead of contaminating it. Once research revealed that these compounds were endocrine disruptors and possible carcinogens, governments rushed to ban them. It was a sobering moment for households everywhere, especially parents who felt betrayed after using the wrap for school lunches year after year. Today, safer wraps exist, but the memory of how easily something unsafe slipped into every home is hard to forget. It is unsettling to think how many children grew up eating food that carried invisible chemicals only discovered long after the meal was finished. Electric extension cords without grounding or heat plastic food containers revolutionized kitchen storage in the 1970s, their lightweight durability and airtight seals making them seem like the perfect solution for leftovers, lunch packing, and pantry organization. Families stacked them in refrigerators, microwaved them without hesitation, and filled them with everything from spaghetti sauce to birthday cake. But PVC plastic contained phthalates, chemical softeners that made the material flexible, but also leached into food over time. Heat accelerated this process dramatically, so every reheated casserole and every warm soup stored in these containers absorbed compounds now known to disrupt hormones. Children carried lunches to school in containers that slowly released chemicals into their sandwiches. Parents warmed baby food in plastic that transferred toxins with every heated spoonful. When researchers finally connected soft plastic containers to health concerns, regulators banned the most dangerous formulations. The containers that once symbolized modern convenience became cautionary reminders that storing food safely required far more than just a tight-fitting lid. First Christmas brought the friendly ghost into holiday territory with a special that blended his usual gentle scares with festive cheer and lessons about friendship that transcended the boundaries between the living and the dead. Children who loved Casper's regular adventures delighted in seeing him navigate Christmas traditions, make new friends, and prove once again that being different did not mean being alone during the most wonderful time of the year. The animation was simple but effective, carrying the same warmth that had made Casper a beloved character for generations of young viewers seeking something spooky but not too frightening. Families added it to their rotation alongside other holiday favorites, trusting that Casper would deliver the same gentle entertainment he always provided. But when the Casper franchise changed corporate ownership, the new stewards had different priorities and different visions for where the character should go in modern markets. The Christmas special did not fit their plans, so they quietly discontinued it, rather than invest in keeping it available for audiences who might still want to watch it during December evenings. A Snow White Christmas reimagined the classic holiday hijinks with Huckleberry Hound, brought the beloved blue dog into a chilly wonderland where everything that could go wrong during Christmas usually did, often in the most charming ways imaginable. Huckleberry tried decorating trees that fell over the moment he stepped back, sang carols slightly off-key while neighbors politely closed their windows, and attempted to help Santa in ways that created more trouble than assistance. One gag involved Huckleberry wrapping himself completely inside a string of lights, blinking in perfect rhythm with the background music while looking utterly bewildered. Another saw him trying to shovel snow in an animation loop so oddly timed that he never seemed to make any progress at all. Yet kids roared with laughter because the mistakes felt intentional, like part of Huckleberry's gentle holiday charm that made failure feel like success. The humor was light, the pacing slow and cozy, and the animation filled with that unmistakable Hanna-Barbera bounce. But as years passed, certain jokes and cultural references were deemed too outdated for modern reruns. Rights complications added another barrier, and the holiday short slipped quietly into retirement where only warm memories remain. Transformers hung from power poles throughout the 1970s, humming quietly while delivering electricity to neighborhoods that never questioned what was inside those gray metal boxes. The polychlorinated biphenyls used as coolant and insulation seemed like engineering marvels, stable compounds that resisted heat and conducted electricity with remarkable efficiency. Utility companies installed them everywhere, from urban street corners to rural crossroads, creating an invisible network of contamination waiting to happen. When transformers leaked, ruptured, or caught fire, the PCBs spilled onto soil, seeped into groundwater, and drifted through air that children breathed while playing in nearby yards. The chemicals did not break down naturally, persisting in environments and accumulating in human tissues with every new exposure. Studies eventually linked PCBS to cancer, immune disorders, and developmental problems that affected entire communities built near contaminated sites. Regulators banned the chemicals and ordered massive cleanup efforts, but the damage had already spread across the country. Those quiet transformers became symbols of industrial negligence hiding in plain sight. Formaldehyde-emitting particle board was built into aluminum wiring connectors were once hailed as the budget-friendly alternative during the wiring shortages of the 1970s, and countless new homes relied on them. Builders loved them because they were cheap, available, and easy to install, and homeowners loved them because nobody complained about a lower electrical bill. But the flaws were already quietly forming in the walls where nobody could see them. Aluminum expanded and contracted far more than copper, and over time these movements loosened the connections that held everything together. A loose electrical connection is not a small problem. It sparks. It overheats. It quietly melts the surrounding material until one night the wall bursts into flames with no warning. Families across the country were stunned when investigators pointed to the same cheap connectors again and again as the hidden culprit. House fires that seemed accidental were suddenly part of a much bigger pattern. When the recalls finally came, they came with urgency, because by then, too many homes had already paid the price. It is unsettling to think that something so small, something meant to keep the lights on, could bring an entire house down. Valent chromium-plated toasters gleamed on 1970s countertops with a mirror finish so perfect you could check your reflection while waiting for breakfast. These appliances represented the height of kitchen elegance, their shiny surfaces suggesting quality, durability, and sophistication that lesser appliances could not match. What nobody realized was that the chrome plating process used hexavalent chromium, a compound that released toxic fumes when exposed to high heat. Every morning, as bread browned and coils glowed orange, tiny amounts of dangerous compounds drifted into kitchen air. Families breathed them in while pouring coffee, packing lunches, and rushing through breakfast routines that repeated day after day for years. Workers in factories that produced these toasters suffered the most obvious effects, but households absorbed lower doses that accumulated silently. When researchers connected chromium exposure to serious respiratory damage, regulators demanded safer plating methods. The gleaming toasters that once symbolized modern living became cautionary examples of how even the shiniest surfaces can hide invisible threats warming up beside the morning coffee. His family took its roots from a sketch on the Carol Burnett Show and turned it into a full-blown sitcom about a sharp-tongued matriarch named Thelma Harper. Played by Vicki Lawrence, Mama was a walking storm of sarcasm, stubbornness, and slapstick humor. Living in small-town America with her eccentric relatives, she dealt with everyday chaos in ways only she could, by yelling, fussing, and ultimately loving her family through it all. The show combined quick one-liners, outrageous misunderstandings, and over-the-top Southern charm. Every argument felt like a comedy showdown, with Mama always getting the last word. Despite its wild tone, Mama's family had a genuine heart. Beneath the snark and shouting was a relatable story about families sticking together through thick and thin. It captured small-town life in all its messy glory, funny, loud, and endlessly entertaining. Vicki Lawrence's performance anchored it all, giving Mama just enough warmth to balance the sass. Decades later, her blue dress and gray wig remain iconic symbols of 1980s sitcom gold. The Carefree Christmas Circus special was exactly what it sounded like. A holiday celebration bursting with acrobats, jugglers, tightrope walkers, and a ringmaster who narrated with dramatic flair that made each act feel like the greatest show on earth. The animation bounced with bright colors and swirling spotlights, making the whole special feel like a miniature circus tent filled with winter magic. Kids watched wide-eyed as performers flipped through the air, spun plates on impossibly long poles, and juggled ornaments high above the ring while cheerful music played. There was a warmth to the production that made the circus feel like family, a place where everyone belonged and every act received thunderous animated applause. The animals performed alongside human characters, adding whimsy that children especially adored. But in later years, shifting views on animal welfare and circus content caused studios to retire the special entirely. It has not aired in decades, leaving behind only the warm memory of a circus that celebrated Christmas with fearless joy under painted canvas skies. Only DDT household insecticides were sprayed freely inside homes during the 1970s, coating kitchen corners, bedroom baseboards, and anywhere else bugs might dare to appear. Families trusted these products completely, believing the powerful chemical mist was protecting their homes from pests while posing no danger to people living inside. The spray cans promised quick results, and people used them liberally, filling rooms with a haze that settled onto countertops, toys, and furniture. Children played on floors where DDT residue lingered for weeks. Pets walked through treated areas and licked their paws clean, and nobody questioned what they were breathing. The chemical had been celebrated as a miracle of modern science, capable of wiping out mosquitoes and saving lives in regions plagued by malaria. But inside American homes, the compound accumulated in bodies, disrupted hormones, and passed through food chains in ways scientists were only beginning to understand. When researchers documented the environmental devastation and health risks, DDT was banned for household use, leaving a toxic legacy that took decades to fade. The microwave oven models without radiation shielding were the wild frontier of new technology in the 1970s. Families were mesmerized by the idea of heating food in seconds, and microwaves became a symbol of progress and modern living. But early units were imperfect, rushed to market before the science was fully understood. Some leaked microwave energy through gaps in the door seal or thin shielding, and people reported headaches, dizziness, and strange tingling sensations when standing too close. Parents began noticing pets acting oddly near the machines, and technicians documented power leaks far above safe limits. Regulators stepped in fast once the danger became impossible to ignore. New standards forced manufacturers to redesign the doors, seals, and internal shielding, making the earlier models illegal to sell. It is unsettling to think how many families treated these early microwaves like harmless appliances, unaware that standing in the wrong spot could expose them to invisible energy no one yet understood. Fiberglass insulated electric skillets were among the most popular plug-in cooking devices of the 1970s, their convenient temperature dials and spacious cooking surfaces making them perfect for everything from pancake breakfasts to one-pan dinners. Families loved that these skillets heated evenly and could be used right at the table, eliminating the need to transfer food from stove to serving dish. The insulation wrapped around the heating elements contained fiberglass, which worked beautifully until the skillet aged or suffered scratches that exposed the material beneath. Once compromised, microscopic glass fibers could work their way into food or drift into the air during cooking sessions. People scraped metal utensils across surfaces without knowing they were releasing particles that irritated lungs and skin on contact. When manufacturers acknowledged the risks and regulators demanded safer alternatives, many families had already used these skillets for a decade or more. The convenient countertop cooking solution had been quietly shedding invisible hazards into Sunday brunches and weeknight dinners all along. PVC. Rudolph's Shiny New Year was the kind of sequel that felt less like a cash grab and more like a gift to children who could not get enough of their favorite reindeer and his glowing red nose. The story took Rudolph far beyond the North Pole, sending him on a quest to find a lost baby called Happy, who held the fate of the coming year in his tiny hands. Strange islands appeared, each one stranger than the last, populated by characters who seemed plucked from a fever dream of holiday cheer and ancient mythology blended together. Kids watched with wide eyes as camels, whales, and a terrifying vulture named Eon chased Rudolph through landscapes that looked nothing like anything else on television at the time. But years later, the character rights became a battlefield as multiple studios claimed ownership, estates intervened, and lawyers replaced animators as the people shaping Rudolph's future. Streaming platforms passed on the title rather than untangle the mess. What was once a beloved adventure became a cautionary tale about intellectual property, locked behind legal walls too high for nostalgia alone to climb. Almost Was Not Animated Edition took the live-action holiday film and reimagined it with bouncy energy, as if someone decided the original needed twice as many sparkles and half as much gravity. Characters moved with exaggerated gestures, eyes grew wide during emotional moments, and Santa Claus nodded in looping animation cycles that made him look perpetually agreeable to whatever chaos unfolded around him. The villain looked less menacing than confused, wandering through scenes like he forgot why he was causing trouble. Songs from the original were reimagined with synthesizers and jingle bells layered thick. Kids loved the chaos, parents tolerated the noise, and everyone agreed that something about the whole production felt delightfully unhinged. The special aired during holiday marathon blocks, sandwiched between commercials for toys nobody remembers anymore. But master tapes were shuffled between studios during mergers nobody documented properly. Eventually, the animated remake slipped through the cracks entirely, existing now only in the foggy memories of those who caught it at exactly the right moment during some long-ago December evening when magic still felt possible. Leaded gasoline was pumped into every family car during the 1970s without a second thought, filling tanks at corner stations while children sat in back seats with windows rolled down, breathing in fumes that drifted through the summer air. The lead additive made engines run smoother, reduced knocking, and seemed like a technological triumph that benefited everyone. Gas station attendants wiped windshields while standing in clouds of exhaust, never suspecting that the fuel keeping America moving was slowly poisoning the population. Lead particles settled onto playgrounds near busy roads, drifted into open windows, and accumulated in soil where children played for years afterward. The damage was invisible but relentless, affecting brain development and contributing to behavioral problems researchers would later trace to widespread lead exposure. When scientists connected the dots, the evidence was overwhelming. Regulators phased out leaded gasoline, but the contamination left behind took generations to address. The fuel that powered a nation's cars had quietly harmed its children, a legacy that still echoes in health statistics today. Phosphate-heavy laundry detergents were once the standard in every laundry room, promising cleaner clothes, brighter whites, and powerful stain removal. People loved how effective they were and how soft the clothes felt afterward. But every wash cycle sent phosphates down household drains and into rivers, lakes, and streams. These chemicals acted like fertilizer for algae, triggering massive blooms that choked waterways, depleted oxygen, and devastated fish and plant life. Entire ecosystems collapsed silently, while families unknowingly contributed load after load of detergent. Scientists sounded the alarm when lakes turned murky and lifeless, covered in thick layers of algae that smelled sour and looked unnatural. Environmental agencies linked the damage directly to phosphate detergents and pushed for an urgent ban. When new regulations took effect, many families were stunned to learn that their everyday laundry routine had played a role in harming the environment. It is a powerful reminder that even the smallest household habit can ripple outward into something much larger than anyone expects. Clothes or can openers without blade guards seemed like brilliant inventions when they first appeared in 1970s kitchens, promising to end the struggle of manual cranking and the frustration of jagged lid edges. Families plugged them in beside the toaster and used them daily, marveling at how effortlessly the spinning blades sliced through metal. The problem was that early designs left the cutting mechanism completely exposed, creating a spinning hazard that waited patiently for the slightest mistake. Adults reached to remove stuck lids and found their fingers meeting sharp metal instead. Children who tried to help with kitchen chores discovered that the machine did not distinguish between tin cans and curious hands. Emergency rooms reported a steady stream of deep cuts, some requiring stitches, others leaving permanent scars on fingers that had simply reached in at the wrong moment. Manufacturers eventually redesigned the mechanisms with guards and safety switches, but the original versions had already caused countless injuries. Those early electric openers became reminders that convenience without caution is just another word for danger waiting in the drawer. Ziggy's gift captured the melancholy charm of the beloved comic strip character and placed him in a Christmas story that hit harder than anyone expected from a bald, round-headed everyman. The animation was simple but emotionally effective, following Ziggy as he tried to spread holiday cheer despite facing setback after setback in a world determined to crush his gentle spirit. Children watched with a mix of sadness and hope, rooting for a character who never gave up even when everything went wrong. Parents appreciated the deeper message about perseverance and kindness, finding themselves surprisingly moved by a cartoon they had expected to be light entertainment. The special won an Emmy and earned critical praise, but that success did not protect it from the business realities that followed. Syndication deals that kept it on the air eventually collapsed in the late 80s as networks restructured. No streaming platform picked it up, and home video releases became increasingly difficult to find. Ziggy's Gift became another casualty of changing times, beloved by those who remembered it, but invisible to newer generations who never got the chance to discover its quiet power. A Time special felt like someone had crafted the entire holiday out of green clay, warm lighting, and pure imagination stretched into stop-motion magic. Gumby and Pokey wandered through a snowy clay landscape where every footprint looked freshly pressed, every tree shimmered with hand-sculpted care, and every character had that gentle wobble unique to claymation of the era. The story was simple and heartfelt, often involving someone needing help, something going missing, or a small Christmas miracle tucked into a pocket of the clay world waiting to be discovered. Kids watched in awe as each scene seemed to breathe in slow, careful motions that felt more like dreams than television. The textures were rich, the colors were warm, and the silence between musical cues made every moment feel precious and intentional. But claymation was fragile. The materials aged quickly, and the original master suffered damage that made proper restoration nearly impossible. With no reruns scheduled and no reissued copies circulating, the special faded from public memory. People who saw it still recall the soft glow of its world and the peaceful snow that looked like it might melt if you touched the screen. Sweetened countless products throughout the 1970s, from diet sodas to sugar-free candies that parents handed to children without a second thought. The artificial sweetener seemed like a miracle for anyone watching their weight, offering the taste of sugar without the calories that health-conscious families feared. Restaurants kept packets on every table, and grocery stores stocked shelves with products proudly advertising their saccharin content. People trusted it completely because it had been around for decades, and nobody had warned them otherwise. But laboratory studies began revealing troubling connections between saccharin and bladder tumors in rats, findings that sent shockwaves through the food industry. The government eventually required warning labels on every saccharin product, alerting buyers to potential cancer risks that had never been mentioned before. Families who had been pouring the sweetener into their morning coffee suddenly found themselves questioning everything they thought they knew about safety. The labels stayed for years, a constant reminder that even widely accepted products could hide dangers nobody anticipated. Clackers with acrylic balding sprays for decor were a favorite craft item in the 1970s, coating leaves, pine cones, wreaths, and holiday centerpieces in gleaming metallic color. The mist created a shimmering effect that felt elegant and artistic, transforming ordinary objects into sparkling decorations. But the spray contained fine metallic particles and solvents that easily entered the lungs when inhaled. Many people used the sprays indoors, unaware that each burst released chemicals that lingered in the air long after the project was finished. Children helped with craft projects, breathing in vapors meant only for professional studios. Over time, researchers linked these sprays to lung irritation, chronic respiratory issues, and long-term damage in frequent users. When regulators discovered how harmful these airborne particles were, especially in enclosed spaces, the harsher formulas were banned. Looking back, it feels startling to imagine families gathered around a table, crafting holiday decorations while unknowingly filling their home with hazardous fumes. The beauty the sprays created came with a cost nobody understood until much later. Gilded microwave ovens were the technological marvels that every 1970s household wanted to own, promising to revolutionize cooking with invisible waves that heated food in minutes instead of hours. Families gathered around these humming metal boxes with a mixture of awe and curiosity, watching through small windows as leftovers spun on turntables. But early models were rushed to market before anyone fully understood how to contain the energy pulsing inside them. Doors sealed poorly, shielding was inconsistent, and radiation leaked through gaps that manufacturers had not yet learned to prevent. People stood inches away, faces pressed close to watch their food rotate, absorbing energy that escaped through faulty seals. Some reported headaches, dizziness, or a strange tingling sensation when standing too close during operation. Pets avoided kitchens where these machines hummed, and houseplants near countertops wilted without explanation. When regulators finally tested the older units, they discovered leakage levels far exceeding what would later be considered safe. The bans and recalls followed quickly, forcing manufacturers to redesign every seal before selling another unit. Electric Christmas with the Groovy Ghoulies was unlike any holiday cartoon before or since. Imagine a group of cheerful monsters celebrating Christmas as if they were hosting a rock concert inside a haunted house decorated with twinkling lights and plastic snow. The Ghoulies sang, danced, cracked jokes, and somehow made the spooky season work perfectly with the festive one. Kids adored the bright colors and silly humor, while adults enjoyed the surprisingly catchy songs. It was chaotic, lively, and exactly what 70s animation did best: embrace the weird and make it fun. But the special relied heavily on music owned by multiple companies, and when those rights expired, the whole production was yanked from circulation. Attempts to reissue it ran into legal snarls that turned the special into television folklore. Today, it survives mostly as a nostalgic whisper among fans who remember the joy of watching monsters celebrate Christmas like the world's friendliest house band. If the 1980s The Misfit Robots Save Christmas was one of those specials that felt like it came straight out of a toy aisle where imagination mattered more than logic or engineering blueprints. The robots clanked around with stiff movements, blinking lights, and cheerful beeps that came from whatever sound effects the studio could find on short notice. Their mission was simple: help Santa when his workshop gears jammed or his conveyor belts froze from winter mischief nobody could explain. Kids loved the idea of toys saving Christmas, especially toys with mismatched parts and big hearts glowing warmly through their chest compartments. Each robot had a distinct personality despite looking assembled from spare parts found behind a hardware store. The animation had that charming jerkiness where movements skipped frames in ways that made the robots feel even more mechanical and endearing. But the entire special was sponsored by a toy company that eventually went out of business, taking all the broadcast rights with it. When the company folded, no one stepped in to preserve the cartoon, and it quietly disappeared from every schedule and archive. Santa and gilded microwave ovens hummed in kitchens throughout the 1970s, heating food with invisible waves that families trusted without fully understanding. These early models represented cutting-edge technology, promising faster meals and easier cleanup for busy households eager to embrace the future. But the shielding that kept microwave radiation inside the oven was not always adequate, and some units leaked energy through gaps in door seals or improperly fitted panels. Families stood close to running microwaves, watching food rotate through small windows while radiation escaped in quantities nobody measured or regulated. People reported headaches, dizziness, and strange sensations when standing too close, but complaints were often dismissed as technophobia or imagination. When engineers finally tested these units, the readings confirmed what some users had suspected all along. Regulators imposed strict shielding standards that forced manufacturers to redesign their products from the ground up. The convenient appliance that had seemed so futuristic suddenly required safety certifications and warning labels that reminded everyone how much remained unknown about the technologies filling modern homes. PCB-filled electrical hard plastic baby bottles containing BPA were everywhere in the 1970s, tucked into diaper bags, lined up on kitchen counters, and handed to sleepy newborns without a second thought. Parents loved how durable they were, how easily they washed, and how they never shattered like old glass bottles did. They seemed like the safer choice, the practical choice, the modern choice. But inside that strong plastic was a chemical that slowly seeped into the warm milk and formula held inside it, especially when heated in hot water or a sterilizer. That chemical was BPA, and researchers would later discover that even tiny traces could interfere with hormones in infants, affecting development in ways nobody even imagined at the time. What makes it feel even worse is that parents back then genuinely believed they were doing the right thing. They trusted the packaging, they trusted the science, and they trusted the stores that sold these bottles by the millions. When researchers eventually linked BPA to endocrine disruption, the shock was enormous. Suddenly, the object a parent held closest during the earliest days of their child's life was the same object experts were urgently telling them to throw away. The ban came swiftly once the truth sank in, and companies scrambled to replace every design. But the uneasy feeling lingered for years afterward, as parents wondered how something so small and so ordinary had carried a danger no one warned them about. Crystal juice pitchers were the elegant centerpieces of 1970s breakfast tables, their faceted surfaces catching morning light and turning ordinary orange juice into something that looked almost ceremonial. Families used them for Sunday brunches, holiday gatherings, and everyday meals, believing that beautiful glassware elevated even the simplest breakfast routine. The weight of these pitchers felt substantial and reassuring, a sign of quality that cheaper alternatives could never match. What nobody understood was that lead crystal slowly released its toxic metal into acidic liquids, and fruit juice was about as acidic as kitchen beverages could get. Every pour contaminated the drink with lead that accumulated in bones, blood, and developing brains. Children drank glass after glass of juice their parents believed was healthy, never suspecting the elegant pitcher was quietly undermining every vitamin the orange juice contained. When researchers documented how rapidly lead leached from crystal into acidic drinks, the warnings spread quickly. Those beautiful pitchers now sit unused in cabinets, too dangerous for juice, but too cherished to throw away. Methylene chloride took a familiar character and dropped him into a holiday setting that felt both magical and melancholy. The wooden boy wandered through snowy streets, longing for a family Christmas he feared he would never have, while catchy songs and colorful animation kept children entertained even as the emotional stakes rose higher than expected. Parents watched their kids fall in love with Pinocchio all over again, this time wrapped in tinsel and surrounded by carolers who seemed to step straight out of a Victorian greeting card. The special aired regularly for several years, becoming a quiet tradition in households that appreciated its blend of whimsy and heart. But Pinocchio himself belonged to a complicated web of international copyright claims, with different countries holding different rights to different versions of the character. When broadcasters tried to negotiate reruns, the licensing demands came from so many directions that no deal could be reached. The special vanished from schedules, replaced by programming with cleaner ownership trails. Today, Pinocchio's Christmas exists in a legal gray zone, loved by many but accessible to almost no one through legitimate channels. The Little Drummer's magical Christmas adventure existed in that strange gap before Rankin Bass turned the snowman into an official holiday icon, back when smaller studios could still take a swing at beloved characters without corporate interference. This version of Frosty looked slightly different in every scene, sometimes rounder, sometimes taller, his corncob pipe tilting at angles that defied the laws of snow and physics. The animation wobbled charmingly. Backgrounds looked like watercolor paintings left out in a blizzard, and the voice acting had that enthusiastic amateur quality that made everything feel homemade in the best possible way. Kids did not care that the budget was low because the heart was high, and Frosty's laugh echoed through living rooms like the sound of childhood itself. The story followed him through snowdrifts, past gingerbread houses, and into a climax involving glowing stars and promises of return. But when the official Frosty franchise tightened its grip on the character, this odd little special vanished overnight. No reruns, no home releases, just whispered memories from people who swear they saw something magical before it melted away forever. The little solvents sat under kitchen sinks and in garage cabinets throughout the 1970s, used for everything from degreasing engines to removing stains from clothing and upholstery. The liquid evaporated quickly, left no residue, and seemed like the perfect solution for tough cleaning jobs that water and soap could not handle. Families used it liberally, soaking rags and scrubbing surfaces in enclosed spaces without opening windows or wearing gloves. The fumes were strong, but people assumed that effectiveness and strength went hand in hand. What nobody understood was that carbon tetrachloride attacks the liver and kidneys with devastating efficiency, causing damage that could prove fatal even from short-term exposure. Workers who used the solvent regularly developed symptoms that doctors initially struggled to diagnose, and some died before anyone connected their illness to the cleaning products they trusted. When regulators finally banned carbon tetrachloride for consumer use, families were shocked to learn that something so ordinary had been so dangerous. The cleaning solution that promised spotless results instead left a legacy of preventable tragedies. PVC inflatable furniture was a short-lived craze in the 1970s, filling bedrooms and basements with clear plastic chairs that looked like they came straight out of a futuristic movie. Teenagers loved them. College students filled entire dorm rooms with them, and catalogs advertised them as the ultimate mix of style and affordability. But the plastic they were made from contained chemicals that released fumes, especially in warm rooms or direct sunlight. Anyone who owned one remembers the strange chemical smell that never quite faded, no matter how often the chair was cleaned. These fumes included plasticizers and volatile compounds now known to cause respiratory irritation and long-term health effects. The more these chairs heated up, the more they released, turning bedrooms into low-level chemical chambers without anyone realizing it. When regulators examined the off-gassing levels, the results were alarming enough to trigger bans on certain PVC formulas. The once iconic clear chair vanished almost overnight, replaced by safer materials. Today, the memory of those floating plastic seats comes with the unsettling knowledge that they were quietly polluting the air the whole time. High lead drain crystals were the brutal problem solvers that 1970s homeowners reached for whenever kitchen sinks backed up with grease and food debris. These powerful pellets promised to dissolve clogs in minutes, and they delivered with terrifying efficiency. Families poured them into standing water, watching the crystals hiss, steam, and generate heat intense enough to warp plastic pipes. The chemical reaction was violent, bubbling as it ate through whatever blocked the drain. But sodium hydroxide did not care what it dissolved. Skin, eyes, and lungs were just as vulnerable as the grease-clogging pipes. One splash during pouring, one moment of carelessness, and the burns arrived instantly. Children who wandered into kitchens during drain treatments sometimes encountered fumes or residue that caused injuries requiring immediate medical attention. When safer enzymatic cleaners emerged and regulators documented the household dangers, the most concentrated formulations were pulled from consumer shelves. Those drain crystals had promised clean pipes, but delivered chemical burns to families who trusted the labels. PCB Christmas Gold tried something ambitious by blending Irish folklore with holiday traditions, creating a world where magical creatures and Christmas miracles existed side by side in ways no other special had attempted. Children loved the novelty of leprechauns appearing in A Christmas Story, and the animation had that familiar Rankin bass warmth that made everything feel cozy and safe during cold winter broadcasts. Families added it to their rotation, enjoying the change of pace from reindeer and snowmen, and the special aired for several seasons without controversy or complaint from viewers. But as cultural awareness shifted, critics began pointing to certain characterizations as outdated and potentially offensive to modern audiences. The accents, the stereotypes, and the broad comedic strokes that seemed harmless in the 70s now raised concerns that networks preferred to avoid entirely. Rather than edit or contextualize, broadcasters simply stopped airing it, and the special disappeared from schedules with little fanfare. Today, it exists in a strange limbo, neither officially banned nor officially available. The First Christmas. Rascal's Christmas cartoons captured the mischievous spirit of childhood holiday chaos in ways only the 1970s could deliver without apology. Spanky led his ragtag gang through schemes involving stolen cookies, crooked Christmas trees, and well-meaning disasters that spiraled hilariously out of control within the first 5 minutes of every episode. The animation had that scratchy, hand-drawn quality where characters sometimes drifted slightly off model, making them feel like sketches come to life rather than polished productions. Alfalfa sang carols in his signature cracking voice, Darla attempted to organize pageants that collapsed immediately, and Buckwheat improvised lines that made the whole cast break character in ways animators left in for charm. Parents watched alongside their children, laughing at gags that worked across generations. But the humor reflected its era in ways that aged poorly, and licensing for The Little Rascals became tangled in decades of ownership disputes nobody could resolve. The cartoons were quietly retired, never remastered, and rarely mentioned again. For anyone who caught them, though, the memory of that scrappy holiday joy still glows. The animated Nutcracker child-proof medication bottles sat in bathroom cabinets throughout the 1970s, their simple twist-off caps offering no resistance to curious little hands. Parents stored aspirin, sleeping pills, and prescription medications on low shelves or countertops, trusting that children would not open bottles clearly meant for adults. But children are naturally curious, and brightly colored pills often looked like candy to eyes that could not read warning labels. Accidental poisonings surged as toddlers swallowed medications they found within easy reach, and emergency rooms struggled to keep up with cases that could have been prevented by better packaging. Some children died before help could arrive, and others suffered permanent damage from overdoses that happened in seconds. When regulators mandated child-proof caps, the pharmaceutical industry resisted the added cost and complexity, but the evidence was too overwhelming to ignore. Today, every medication bottle requires deliberate effort to open, a small inconvenience that saves thousands of young lives every year. The simple twist cap became a relic of an era that underestimated both children's ingenuity and their vulnerability. Unshielded foam insulation was marketed as the miracle shortcut for any homeowner who wanted a warm house without spending a fortune, and countless families in the 1970s eagerly embraced it. Contractors filled walls with this airy white foam that expanded quickly, hardened fast, and seemed like a modern solution to drafty living rooms. For a brief moment, it felt like every neighborhood was upgrading at once, sealing up their homes with what was promised to be the future of budget-friendly insulation. But soon, the complaints started rolling in, and they were not mild ones. People began waking up with burning eyes, aching lungs, raw throats, and an unshakable chemical smell that clung to every room in the house. Children developed chronic coughs, pets fell sick, and entire families wondered why their homes suddenly felt hostile instead of safe. Investigators eventually discovered that this foam released dangerous formaldehyde fumes that built up inside sealed houses, especially in the winter months when windows stayed shut. The government banned it once the evidence became undeniable, but thousands were left with walls that continued to off-gas for years. What started as a cheap improvement became one of the most regretted home upgrades of the decade, a reminder that not every shortcut is worth taking. Paint stripper sprays were the secret weapons of 1970s kitchen renovations, promising to remove old paint from cabinets, trim, and furniture with minimal effort and maximum results. Homeowners sprayed them in enclosed spaces, watching layers of old paint bubble and peel away like magic, while breathing fumes that seemed like a small price for such impressive efficiency. The chemical worked by dissolving paint on contact, but it also converted to carbon monoxide inside the human body, creating a danger far more immediate than anyone suspected. People collapsed in kitchens and basements without warning, overcome by fumes that acted faster than they could recognize the symptoms. Some never made it to fresh air in time. The tragedies accumulated quietly before anyone connected the pattern to this common renovation product. When regulators finally demanded bans, the evidence was overwhelming and heartbreaking. Those spray cans had turned weekend improvement projects into life-threatening situations, hidden behind labels that never warned how quickly a closed door could become the difference between finishing a project and never walking out. Jack Frost from 1979 gave winter itself a face, a voice, and a love story that enchanted children who had never thought of the season as anything more than cold and snow. The Rankin-Bass version turned Jack into a romantic figure, willing to sacrifice his immortality for a chance at human love, and the bittersweet ending left many young viewers confused but deeply moved. Parents watched their children grapple with themes of loss and transformation, surprised by how much emotional weight a holiday special could carry beneath its cheerful surface. The songs stuck in heads for weeks, and the imagery of Jack dancing across frozen landscapes became iconic for those who saw it during its original broadcasts. But the contracts that allowed those broadcasts eventually expired, and negotiations to renew them collapsed under demands from multiple parties claiming pieces of the production. Streaming services passed on the title, home video rights stalled indefinitely, and Jack Frost himself seemed to melt away from public memory. Fans who remember it speak of it with a reverence usually reserved for lost masterpieces. The Leprechauns' Ann and Andy Christmas Hour was the kind of animated special that felt stitched together with yarn, fabric, and pure holiday innocence. The sort of program that made children believe their own toys might come alive when no one was watching. Raggedy Ann moved across the screen with that soft, wobbly charm only hand-drawn animation could achieve, her button eyes catching the glow of Christmas lights in every scene. Families gathered on living room floors, plates balanced on laps, watching as Ann and Andy wandered through adventures that seemed pulled straight from a child's fever dream of wonder. The music was gentle, the colors were warm, and every frame radiated a handmade quality that modern productions simply cannot replicate. Studios poured care into every stitch of those characters, creating something that felt personal and precious to anyone who watched. But ownership of the characters shifted hands multiple times over the years, tangling the rights in legal complications nobody could untangle. The special aired only a handful of times before vanishing into a vault no lawyer could pry open. Today, only faded memories and a few grainy photographs prove it ever existed at all. Frost baby walkers with unrestricted wheels were marketed as essential tools for helping infants learn to stand and move on their own in the 1970s. Parents loved them because they kept babies entertained and seemingly safe while dinner was being prepared. The walkers rolled smoothly across kitchen floors and living room carpets, giving babies a taste of independence before they could even crawl properly. Advertisements showed smiling infants gliding happily from room to room, and pediatricians rarely warned against them because the dangers had not yet been documented. But homes in that era were full of hazards that walkers made worse. Staircases sat open without gates, thresholds created unexpected drops, and the wheels moved faster than any parent could react. Babies rolled toward basement steps, tumbled down flights of stairs, and crashed into sharp furniture corners before anyone could reach them. The injuries were devastating, often involving head trauma that left lasting damage. When researchers connected walker design to emergency room visits, regulations tightened and the original models disappeared from shelves. Chlorofluorocarbon aerosol mercury switch thermostats were once a staple on the wall of almost every household, with their tiny internal capsules silently tipping back and forth to regulate the heating. The simple click that signaled a change in temperature was considered reliable, steady, and comforting. Hidden behind that dial, however, was a sealed glass tube filled with liquid mercury, a substance now known to be extremely hazardous to people and the environment. Homeowners never thought about what would happen if the thermostat broke or was thrown out with normal trash. When smashed or discarded, these tiny tubes released mercury into the air or soil, creating contamination far greater than anyone realized. Over time, landfills became dotted with these fragile thermostats, each one capable of releasing toxic vapor into surrounding areas. Regulators stepped in once the scale of the problem became clear, banning new mercury thermostats and demanding safe disposal methods for old ones. For families who grew up with those beige plastic boxes on the wall, it is unnerving to realize how close they lived to a dangerous heavy metal every day. A device meant to protect comfort and temperature also carried a hidden cost no one understood until decades later. Messenger told a quiet story about delivering holiday hope to those who needed it most, wrapped in animation that felt handcrafted and sincere in ways mass-produced specials rarely achieved during the busy 70s production era. Children watched with wide eyes as the messenger traveled through snow and hardship, proving that small acts of kindness could transform entire communities when offered with genuine love and selfless intention. The special aired only a handful of times, always sponsored by a single company that believed in its message and paid for its broadcast as a gift to family audiences during the holiday season. Parents who caught it often remarked on how different it felt from the flashier, louder specials that dominated the airwaves, competing for attention with bright colors and celebrity voices. But when the sponsoring company withdrew its support due to changing marketing priorities, no replacement stepped forward to fund continued broadcasts or home video distribution. The Christmas messenger delivered its final message and then quietly disappeared, leaving behind only scattered memories among the few families fortunate enough to have witnessed its brief journey. The North Pole Talent Show was a musical spectacle that played out like a holiday variety hour hosted by elves who had clearly never rehearsed anything in their lives. Reindeer performed tap routines with hooves clicking against icy stages. Snowmen attempted comedy acts that melted halfway through their punchlines, and penguins delivered songs with so much enthusiasm that the audio sometimes distorted. One unforgettable act involved a gingerbread quartet that crumbled apart mid-song, yet somehow finished their performance with crumbs flying everywhere. Another featured an elf magician whose trick succeeded only because the animation occasionally skipped a frame at exactly the right moment. Kids watched in awe, not because the acts were polished, but because anything could happen on that tiny, frosty stage at any second. The backgrounds shimmered with glittery blues and whites, giving the whole special a frosty glow that made living rooms feel colder in the best way. But the show relied heavily on original songs, and the music licensing fees ballooned over the decades. Networks refused to pay the renewal costs, and the special was withdrawn from circulation entirely to gather dust in some forgotten archive. Model glue was sold openly to children throughout the 1970s, stocked on hobby store shelves alongside plastic kits and paint sets without any age restrictions or safety warnings. Kids bought tubes of the adhesive for building model airplanes, cars, and ships, squeezing the potent formula onto tiny parts while breathing in fumes that filled bedrooms and basements. The chemical smell was strong and distinctive, but nobody thought to question whether inhaling it posed any danger. Parents assumed that anything sold for children's hobbies must be safe for children to use. But the solvents in model glue were far from harmless. Some children discovered that inhaling the fumes produced a temporary high, and that discovery led to abuse patterns that ended in brain damage, organ failure, and death. When the scope of the problem became clear, regulators stepped in with age restrictions, reformulated products, and warning labels that had never existed before. The hobby that taught patience and precision became associated with tragedy, and families learned that even innocent-looking craft supplies could carry life-threatening risks. Lead-soldered food cans lined pantry shelves throughout the 1970s, preserving vegetable. Paint strippers with methylene chloride were considered the heavy-duty answer to stubborn paint jobs, and anyone tackling home renovation in the 1970s probably had a can of it in the garage. It worked fast, cut through layers of paint like nothing else, and made do-it-yourself. Projects feel like magic. But the warning labels were vague, and the risks were far worse than anyone realized. Methylene chloride turns into carbon monoxide inside the body, and in enclosed spaces, it can kill within minutes. Many people brushed it on in basements, bathrooms, or sheds with no ventilation at all. They would kneel down, breathe deeply without thinking, and collapse before they understood what was happening. The tragedies piled up, from weekend hobbyists to seasoned professionals, all undone by a chemical sold at any hardware shop. By the time regulators stepped in, the pattern was already undeniable. These products were simply too dangerous for everyday homes. Looking back, it is hard to believe that something so lethal sat quietly on store shelves for years, disguised as just another home improvement tool. Cadmiol cooking sprays seemed like the ultimate kitchen convenience when they first appeared in 1970s homes, promising to coat pans evenly and prevent sticking with just a quick burst from the can. Families kept them beside stovetops for easy access, reaching for them before every fried egg, grilled cheese, and sautéed vegetable. The sprays worked beautifully, creating thin layers of oil that made cleanup effortless and cooking nearly foolproof. But the propellants that pushed the oil out of the can were highly flammable, and kitchens are full of open flames and hot surfaces. One accidental spray too close to a burner, one moment of distraction while the stove was lit, and the entire stream could ignite in a fireball that traveled back toward the can. Kitchen fires started by these sprays sent families to emergency rooms with burns they never saw coming. When safety regulators demanded reformulated propellants and warning labels, the old cans quietly disappeared. Those convenient sprays had turned ordinary stovetops into potential fire hazards, hiding in plain sight beside the salt and pepper. Tile countertops Charles Dickens' story that most Americans had never read, transforming it into an animated musical that charmed children with talking insects and heartfelt songs. The cricket himself became a beloved character, his chirping wisdom guiding human characters through misunderstandings and reconciliations that resolved just in time for a happy holiday ending. Families discovered it by accident during channel surfing, fell in love with its peculiar warmth, and made it part of their December traditions without hesitation. The voice cast delivered performances that elevated simple animation into something genuinely touching, and kids quoted lines for years without knowing they were quoting Dickens. But the agreements with those voice actors contained clauses that expired without clear paths to renewal. When the original performers passed away or their estates became involved, the legal complications multiplied beyond what any distributor wanted to navigate. Cricket on the Hearth hopped quietly out of circulation, leaving behind fans who remember its songs and wonder why something so lovely could simply cease to exist. Frosty's Winter Wonderland tried to recapture the Bear's Lost Christmas Caper was one of those blink-and-you-miss-it specials that aired in only a handful of regions at odd hours, usually tucked between local weather reports and afternoon movie reruns. Yogi wandered through a snow-covered Jellystone park with Boo Boo at his side, both determined to help Santa after his sleigh developed mysterious mechanical troubles above the ranger station. The animation had that classic Hanna-Barbera bounce where characters slid across backgrounds instead of walking, and mouths flapped enthusiastically without always matching the words being spoken. Yogi attempted to deliver presents using methods that violated park regulations, borrowing vehicles, commandeering picnic baskets, and charming tourists into helping with schemes they did not fully understand. Ranger Smith chased him through snowdrifts with the same exasperated energy he brought to summer episodes, never catching on that the chaos was for a good cause. But because the special aired regionally, no major studio archived the master reels. Local copies were reused, taped over, or simply misplaced during station changes. Today, only scattered memories and disputed plot details remain from those who watched. Pajamas without flame retardants were sold as soft, comfortable sleepwear throughout the 1970s, wrapped in packaging that promised cozy nights and peaceful dreams. Parents dressed their kids in these lightweight garments without knowing that the fabric could ignite in seconds if it came too close to a heater, stove, or open flame. The materials looked innocent enough, printed with cartoon characters and cheerful patterns that made bedtime feel warm and safe. But fires do not discriminate, and when flames met untreated fabric, the results were devastating. Children suffered severe burns from sleepwear that caught fire before anyone could reach them, and some did not survive at all. The tragedies accumulated until regulators could no longer ignore the pattern linking nighttime clothing to preventable deaths. New standards required flame-resistant treatments for all children's sleepwear, transforming an industry that had prioritized softness over safety for far too long. Families who lost children to these fires became advocates for change, ensuring that future generations would never face the same hidden danger in something as simple as pajamas. Three-wheeled all-out blade guards seemed like a futuristic upgrade for a 1970s kitchen. They promised hands-free ease, smooth cutting, and a modern convenience that felt like a small luxury people loved showing them off, pressing a button and watching the can spin as the lid lifted effortlessly. But the early models hid a serious flaw. They had exposed blades that could slice fingers as easily as metal, especially when children tried to use them or when adults reached to remove a stuck lid. Emergency rooms began reporting the same pattern of deep cuts and accidental injuries. What should have been an improvement turned into a hazard that waited for the slightest mistake. Manufacturers rushed to add guards and redesign the safety features, but the early models had already caused far too many accidents. It is a strange feeling knowing that a tool meant to make life easier ended up drawing more blood than any kitchen knife ever did. Microphosphate-loaded dishwasher detergents were the miracle powders that made 1970s dishes sparkle like never before, dissolving grease and eliminating water spots with a chemical efficiency that seemed almost magical. Families poured them into machines without measuring, believing that more powder meant cleaner dishes and brighter glassware. The phosphates inside these detergents softened water and suspended food particles beautifully, but they did not stop working when they drained away. Every wash cycle sent these chemicals flowing through pipes, into sewers, and eventually into lakes, rivers, and streams. Phosphates acted like fertilizer for algae, triggering massive blooms that choked waterways, depleted oxygen, and devastated fish populations across the country. Lakes turned murky green, covered in thick mats of growth that smelled sour and killed everything beneath them. Scientists traced the environmental collapse directly to household detergents used by millions of well-meaning families. When bans finally arrived, many people were shocked to learn that their spotless dishes had contributed to ecological disasters unfolding miles away from their kitchen sinks. The magic of the original Snowman special by giving Frosty a bride and expanding his frozen world into something even more elaborate and colorful. Children loved seeing their favorite snowman find love, build a family, and face new challenges that tested his cheerful spirit against the forces of melting and forgetting. The animation sparkled with that classic holiday charm, and the songs were catchy enough that kids hummed them through January and beyond. Families recorded it on VHS tapes and played it alongside the original, treating both as essential parts of the December viewing experience. But when the original creators passed away and their estates became involved in the business side, everything changed dramatically. Multiple parties claimed residual rights, arguing over percentages and permissions that had never been clearly defined in the original contracts. No streaming service wanted to wade into that legal swamp, and home video releases quietly stopped. Frosty's Winter Wonderland melted away from public access, surviving only in the memories of those who loved it and the aging tapes they treasure. 'Twas the Night Before Christmas from 1974. The Brady Kids Christmas cartoon captured that unmistakable 1970s blend of sunshine, polyester, and groovy optimism, except this time wrapped in holiday ribbons and dusted with animated snowflakes. The Brady Kids, already known for their psychedelic spin-off adventures, found themselves pulled into a Christmas mystery involving talking animals, magic ornaments, and guests from entirely different cartoons. The animation had that charming stiffness of the era where characters struck dramatic poses and held them just long enough for the audience to notice. Marcia tried to organize the perfect celebration, while Greg played it cool, despite juggling responsibilities nobody asked him to handle. Bobby and Cindy stumbled into trouble only Saturday morning logic could justify, and everything resolved with a musical number that felt both inevitable and surprising. The whole special radiated groovy warmth through its color palette alone. But licensing for the Brady Bunch became tangled in webs of ownership changes and distribution disputes that lawyers still argue about. The Christmas cartoon slipped through the cracks, surviving only in the memories of those who caught it at the right moment. Before you go, tell us which forgotten item shocked you the most. Tap like if this journey through band history stirred a memory. And subscribe so you never miss the next deep dive into the world we thought was safe.